This is Illegitimate Scholar, a weekly cultural anthropology interview podcast. Today, I talk to an Irish nationalist about the history of nationalism and the history of British colonialism in Ireland. We talk about Marxists and some of the Irish nationalist groups and issues of immigration. We're going to be talking about Irish nationalism today. So I'm going to start off by going over some history in Ireland of Irish nationalism and where it's gone for 850 years, just about. And then I'm going to let Buck correct me, and we're going to have a talk about Irish nationalism as a cultural force, where it stands today, and talk about some of the stuff that just happens to be happening right now, which is migrants entering Ireland. Okay, so about 850 years ago, there is the beginning of colonization in Ireland. If you've heard anything about this, you've probably heard something like 800 years of oppression. If you've ever heard anything like that, 800 years of colonization. And that starts with an Anglo-Norman invasion. So this is right after the Normans take over England. And then those same Normans or related ones, they go into Ireland. They start going into Ireland. And that was in the east of Ireland. And they captured Dublin. Or maybe they make it, I don't know. But they start up there, okay? And that's the Anglo-Norman invasion. And they go in and they kind of take over the aristocracy. They take over as a minority population that inserts itself on top of another. You have a few hundred years of that, kind of grows, kind of doesn't. It's just general feudalism until the early modern era, and Protestantism is in full force. Oliver Cromwell, who you might remember from high school, was a British dictator, essentially fought against the crown as well as the parliament in the 1600s. Took over. He was extremely Protestant. He went to Ireland and did some pretty brutal stuff. It's up there with the worst people you can think of. Stalin, Hitler, all those guys. It really is up there if you read about what he did. And that's the 1600s. And that starts a plantation system. So similar to the American South in a lot of ways, they were also plantations. There was this system of plantations in Ireland that were owned by landholders, most of these landholders being Protestant landholders that were ruling over a Catholic underclass, an Irish Catholic underclass. A lot of these Protestant people, a few of them were Irish, but a lot of them were Scottish that were brought in as settlers, and there were a lot of English ones as well, many absentee landholders. I hope I'm not saying anything wrong here, Buck.
We've skipped over enormous periods. But
oh, right.
Yeah. No, it's sort of like mission. And just to sort of sum it up and sort of a more, we are 5,000 years ago. People start coming into the island of Ireland. Lots of small tribes, warlords. We have, it's essentially like a warlord system.
Yeah.
We're Indo-European tribes, basically the same as all the other Indo-European tribes. We have a massive neighbor beside us that turns into a superpower, and what happens is the superpower takes over us. We, for large portions of our history, become their breadbasket. In fact, this has been argued that the reason that Britain got so good at colonization was because they tested everything out on us over hundreds of years. You have back and forward of different movement, because what happens in these areas is that your ruling class essentially gets wiped out and a new ruling class comes in. So the Normans come in. You mentioned Dublin. Dublin was a Viking city. So
Right.
The Vikings established. In fact, you find this with all of our cities, which is a thing that sticks in my craw. All of our cities were established by outsiders. So whether it was the Normans, the Vikings, the Ulster Scots, so Belfast and Derry, both Ulster Scot, both Protestant Ulster Scot cities. We find that just throughout our history. So it's that. So do you want to like just jump into sort of like the periods that everybody sort of like knows about? So like will we come into the potato famine? Like
Yeah. So there's the three events that I wanted to talk about after the plantation system, because you have the imposition of the plantation system by Oliver Cromwell. This is the 1600s.
Yes.
And then, this continues to happen. The 1800s, you have the potato famine. I think it's a genocide. I think it's obvious it's a genocide. I can make that argument. That's a different video. That happens. Depopulation of Ireland starts and it continues for a long time. The population doesn't increase for another 100 years. At this point, Ireland is officially a kingdom under the United Kingdom, and it's owned directly by the English king. And there are two events I want to talk about, because, you know, the perception of Irish Americans and of Irish, a lot of it comes from the music, because it's related to American folk music for Americans.
Oh yeah.
So when we're talking about the IRA, there's two IRAs that are like the main IRAs. There's Ireland is a whole thing. There's the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and that is in the Easter Rising 1918. It's that era when Ireland becomes a republic after that. And then the Provisional IRA, which is in the troubles of the 1970s and the time around that. And that's it. So you say whatever you want about the history now, and then we'll get into the culture.
I suppose we just sort of start off. So like a major shift for us is of course the potato famine. So you have a system, you're touched on like the absentee landlords. Ireland was, it was some silly numbers, like 38 men owned Ireland. Everything was divided up, and most of them, and a significant portion of them weren't really bothered. So we had what Cromwell brought in was the land. I can't remember the name of these lands acts, but Irish Catholics couldn't own land. So what ends up happening is that if you can't own land, okay, right. So if you own your land, what you do is, well, this year we're going to plant potatoes, and next year we're going to plant wheat. Next year we're going to let it sit. And
don't worry about it. I'm still here.
Yeah, grand. So the year after that we plant barley, because you're looking after your soil, and you know there's a correct cycle, to plant to plant everything. But if you are you don't own that land, and you might get kicked off it next week or next month or next year, you don't think 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, you want to get as much bang for your buck. So what you do is you start planting potatoes, because you get a lot of calories. Now that's a terrible thing to do, but you get a lot of calories, because a potato, they'll grow in spite of themselves, and they grow a lot of them. It's really good. You sold whatever wee bit of extra you had. But the fact it was actually, so the Irish lived off a diet of potato and buttermilk, actually made Irishmen on average larger than Scots and English as well. So no, it's but again, this is the thing, because they're growing so many potatoes. But you don't just grow potatoes, because someday there's going to be a blight comes through. The Guinness out. I'm actually teetotal. I don't drink.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
I got all the Irish stuff out. I got a flag behind me. I'm not going to furl it out because I got it blurred. But you know, I'm an entertainer. That's what I
do. So we're in this position where everyone has grown this one crop of this one type of potato, and so a blight comes in from South America. I think it was South American guana. It's been used as fertilizer across Europe, sweeps across Spain, sweeps across Germany. In fact, the wave of Germans that come into North America came in because of their potato famine.
Right.
But none of these same time. So the people who came in with Budweiser and stuff like that there, and they came in with that same wave, but they weren't dependent on potatoes. There were lots of other crops. It made things a little more difficult. But because Ireland had been wholly and completely dependent on potatoes, this was devastating. So we have a population of 8 million. It's more than the population is now still to today.
Right.
1 million die to starvation, 2 million leave over the next 20 years, and you keep losing all your young people. So the population just never quite recovered.
And then 150 years later, you have an autistic guy wearing a Celtic jersey talking to another guy in Ireland off of technology. I'm not autistic, by the way, for the listeners. I make too many jokes, and then people think I am.
I'm super autistic. So
that's all right. No, a lot of my friends are. I'm not.
Yeah, if you're, I'm skeptical. If you're making a podcast, it's usually a strong sign of autism.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, what we find in this, like resentment, you find like the birth of Irish nationalism. again, but not this again as this concept of nationalism as we understand it again is sort of being born at this period as well. So it's seeping in. It's seeping in at this point. We have a rebellion of the United Irishmen under Wolfe Tone, and
Right. Wolfe Tone's a Protestant, right?
Wolfe Tone's a Protestant, yes, Church of Ireland. So he's inspired by the French Revolution. You know, he's called him the father of Irish republicanism. Inspired by the French Revolution. In fact, our Irish tricolour was designed in France based on the French tricolour. And the green, white, gold, green being the Irish Catholic, orange being the Protestant, and white stand for peace between them.
Yeah.
So it comes out of that there. But, you know, so we have this idea of like a national spirit. That fails. Wolfe Tone dies in prison. We have a few more years of like, we get Robert Emmet. Again, nothing comes of this here until we get into the 20th century. And we have, again, another big boom in nationalism. Now, there's a whole pile of things. So this is about the sort of like the Wolfe Tone, handsome fella. But we have, so I mean, like the period that most people are going to be in, that, you know, most people are sort of aware of. It's James Connolly, Pierce, Thomas Clark, and the 1916 Easter Rising.
Oh, I said 1918 earlier.
Oh, and it's 1916. So,
and there's multiple Easter Risings. That's why we have to specify.
No, there's, well, I mean, maybe other, I mean, Christ.
They're much more minor. This is the one. This is the
one everybody knows. But so we have the Rising. So it sort of comes in. So World War One's obviously happening. An enormous amount of Irish men have went off to fight for king and country in France. The ones who stay behind take up arms against the British government, and because they want to create an Ireland, an independent Ireland for the Irish people. All the revolutionaries. So you have Connolly, who was a Marxist. You have a lot of the revolutionaries who were monarchists who want to establish a Catholic theocracy. There were letters between Pierce and some of the others talking about maybe siding with Germany and having a German monarch rule over Ireland, because there's like an understanding that you're either part of, you either have an empire or you're part of an empire.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to add that Connolly, I mean, being a Marxist in 1916,
he wasn't walking around
today.
He wasn't walking around saying
pre-Mao. Yeah, it's a whole different idea.
Yeah, he wasn't walking around saying trans rights. So he but it was about workers' rights, and I haven't read an enormous amount about. I'm more of a Pierce.
You touched
why no mention, because we haven't come to Michael Collins yet. That's why.
Yeah.
So Michael Collins in 1916, Michael Collins was a lad, was running around helping.
Yeah.
1916 is an absolute. It's funny because in Ireland it's such a massive, very important thing to us. In British history, it is a footnote. This is so unimportant, complete military disaster. It's completely crushed in a few days. The revolutionaries are taken away. Now, what would have happened, and this sort of changed Irish history. Had the revolutionaries been taken away and arrested and put in prison, there might not be an Irish Republic today. There might not have been an Irish Republic. But what happened was, because World War One was happening, the general who had arrested them said, "Well, no, you are traitors because this is wartime, so we're applying war rules, and you are so we're going to execute you." So they took the 17 away and had them shot. And this lit up that there's one. It's fantastic. We have a song called Grace, And it's about one of the revolutionaries getting married while in prison. And now Grace, just hold me in your arms and let this moment linger, for they'll take me out at dawn and I will die. It was shooting them was just this amazing piece of propaganda. In fact, you have Pierce was excited by the idea of being dying for the cause. That these men were like they had it would have been much worse for them had they just been arrested and held, but dying for the cause. But Pierce is again super autistic, obsessed with heroicism, obsessed with the Iliad and these ideas of.
And a lawyer, apparently.
Oh yeah. Very intelligent man.
Hmm.
But so we have
And also, I'd like to add for the Americans listening, the Royal Irish Constabulary. That's the Black and Tans you've probably heard of. And
no, so they're a separate thing. So the Black and Tans are something separate.
I'm glad I said that then.
Yeah. So the Black and Tans. So the Royal, that was the police basically. It's the Royal.
Right. But they're like a gendarmerie, though. They're like they're a.
They were So what happened was they didn't have enough police uniforms, so they basically created a mercenary group. I can't remember what the actual name for them was, but they wore their old World War One uniforms.
Okay.
And so they were called the Black and Tans. So they were separate. They were separate from the RIC.
Really?
Yes. So they were. These were. Again, it was like they were almost like almost a mercenary group brought in to. So they were very brutal, but this would have been men who would have been fought in a brutal war.
So Black and Tans were constables recruited into the RIC as reinforcements. So specifically the reinforcements during
they
the
are reinforced. Yeah, so they came in. So there weren't any uniforms for them. So these are men who fought in World War One, who'd been brought in as backup and were being paid. Okay. They were essentially mercenaries.
So they did work for the RIC, but they worked part of it.
Yeah, but yeah. But when we talk about the RIC, we're talking about the RIC. The Black and Tans were this separate thing that sort of had fought by their own rules and were a lot more brutal. Again, because they were conscripted soldiers, so you wouldn't say so. Not so. Every Black and Tan was RIC, but not every RIC was a Black and Tan, that sort of way. So there again, so a revolutionary's taken away and shot, and what happens is this starts to fester. In fact, it was Lloyd George said to him after he'd killed him, he says, "You fool, these people love a martyr." It's because you got all this amazing music and all these amazing poems and all, so tragic and just this idea. James Connolly had been shot in the ankle, so they had to when they took him out to be shot, they tied him to a chair in a blindfold. It was just a complete disaster for them, complete and utter mistake, because they made it was because they turned this military disaster into this tragedy. They turned it into this national tragedy where these men who everyone in Dublin knew, and they killed them. Everybody in Dublin knew these people, and they killed them. And so it's now, you bastards, how dare you do this to ours? Michael Collins, an enormous amount of these people are taken away and interned in England. They're held, and one of the people they interned was a young Michael Collins. Michael Collins worked in the post office, and so what he got to do was learn who everybody was, understand how to organize things, and he came back to Ireland, a very handsome man, and he came back.
Yeah, holy crap, he sure is.
Oh yeah, look up his wanted. Look up Michael Collins' wanted poster.
Okay.
Read this. Look up Michael Collins, and I'll read it to you here because this is the most fantastic wanted poster you've ever heard in your entire life. But Collins come back, and what Collins was essentially an incredibly efficient killer. The other fellas had been poets and philosophers and great thinkers and stuff, but no. Michael Collins didn't leave us money writings, but he was very good at killing the people that needed to be killed. That's what he was good at. What's that?
I'm looking at different ones.
I'll just.
There's a few of them. Is this the one you're thinking of?
Let me see how you back up there. Want to post? I look this up on a regular basis. Okay.
And for anybody listening instead of just watching, we're just looking at a poster of an attractive Kennedy-esque looking man
So the Michael Collins wanted poster reads, okay, Michael Collins, height 5'11", complexion fresh, age 28, strong jaw, brown hair which which hangs in a kiss curl over grey blue eyes, strong physique, boyish smile, dangerous. It's like, so whoever wrote that poster was very clearly in love with him.
Yeah,
Um,
seriously.
but yeah, you get it. He just is a man who he was a true alpha male. He exuded energy. Um, so what we have now is the War of Independence under Michael Collins, and it's been fought because what Pierce had tried to do is Pierce tried to have a traditional war. You know, he was going to line up his army, and they were going to take shots, and we're going to take shots, and we're going to, you know, when Pierce surrendered, he handed over his sword over to the army. You know, he loved this idea of the formality of it, and you've seen wars as a beautiful thing. Whereas Collin came in and he seen the person he wanted to shoot, and he shot them in the back of the head, and he went on. He was an efficient killer who understood what had to be done, and he went and done that. And very brutal, very brutal. Had men killed in front of their wives.
Well,
One of the things but this is how you win wars. This
yeah,
is the
right.
reality. And
Colonization.
yeah, no, it's what Collins did, what was a serious problem for the IRA throughout its entire history, was touts, what we refer to as a tout, someone a rat, someone who talks to the police.
Yeah.
Collins went around and killed those people. So it means, no,
Okay.
you're going to rat. No, we're going to kill you then. So,
And that has a cultural purpose. It really does. That it has a cultural purpose of from a if there's a standard in society that if you rat, then you'll get killed, then people aren't they're not
yeah,
gonna.
you're less likely. But it was throughout just throughout history. It was people just going to authorities or talking to somebody or just talking where they shouldn't have been talking.
Mhm.
Um, and so no, Collins cleared out those people, and was just very, very effective at killing the people that need to be killed. Um, we eventually get to we get come to a point where Collins is sent to England to deal with have the peace agreement, and so I'm sure like just jumping through these periods here. So Collins comes to the peace agreement, sent to England. It's argued whether he should have been, because he wasn't a statesman, but um, it's hard to know who actually could have been sent and who but anyway, Collins is sent to England to negotiate the deal. Now, what they wanted was a 32 county Irish Republic. That's what they set out for.
Right.
What they were offered, Lloyd George offered them, was a 26 county free state. So they're still going to remain within under the crown. They still have to take oaths to the king, but they would have autonomy, and there'll be bits and pieces. It came with a lot of strings attached, but essentially you're going to control 26 of the 32 counties.
Right.
Um, this and what Lloyd George said, he goes, he holds up he goes, I have in my hand two letters. This one creates an Irish Free State, and this an announcement of total war. So he'd send 100,000 British soldiers in to just take over, So it's just like, Collins had no options. Now I've heard people argue back and forward now that no, Britain didn't have the fight in them anymore. They'd lost so many in World War One. They didn't care that much that maybe you could have. I've heard people make that argument, but if I was Collins, I would have took the 26 counties too.
Yeah. Yeah.
There
Ulster
was
can go fuck itself at that point. So
yeah, it's this sort of issue where Collins had and this issue is that Ulster was maybe 80% Protestant, maybe 70, 80% Protestant in the
right.
1920s. Um,
And that has an effect where then that affects the free state itself going forward. Maybe you don't want all 32 counties at that point.
Yes, this is actually a problem because like the
But how
likes
about
of
Canada, dude? Canada's
yeah
because of the French.
yeah Quebec, yeah, this is
Yeah,
a similar sort of
Quebec,
thing.
and yeah, it's actually good for North American conservatives because since Quebec is its own thing, they team up with the most conservative provinces, which is Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario, or not Ontario, excuse me, Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan, and they're able to stop a lot of stuff as a coalition against the Toronto-led Liberal Prime Minister blackface government. But sorry, continue.
Yeah.
We weren't talking about Canadian nationalism. We were talking about Irish nationalism. That's for another
But
day.
yeah, it's yeah, again, so we have this um so like De Valera had talked about like this because they wanted to create a Gaelic Catholic. It was basically creating an Irish Israel. It's going to like reinstate that, and if you had to deal with a pile of Unionist Protestants, you weren't going to be fit to do that. Now they weren't fit to do it, even with them, but even without them. But this is sort of the thinking. So we end up 1920. The Irish Free States created and Northern Ireland's created. Now,
Well, I'm sorry. Quick note on that though. Does Northern Ireland then essentially continue with the same form of government that all of Ireland was before then, or is it a new thing on its own? Because Ireland was a kingdom under the UK for like
so
300 years at that point.
so
400.
Parliament set up in Stormont. It's going to be a Protestant Parliament for a Protestant people.
Got it.
So, and essentially just works by itself, does its own thing. Um, so, um, so I'll just jump back 400 years, or sorry, 300 years at that point. We have the plantation of Ulster. One of our high kings of Ulster was Hugh O'Neill. Hugh O'Neill had a rebellion against Elizabeth. He loses this. And so, because Ireland had become, Ulster in particular, had become such a problem for the English, what they decided to do was a plantation. So they decided to take loyal Protestants from North England and Scotland and send them over to Ulster and to colonize, take over the area, because then you don't have to. You can trust them more so than you can trust the Irish native population. This is where our Protestants came from. So jumping back, we then have a period of, so for the next few years, the Republic of Ireland, 1950s, was announced a republic, was changed from being a free state to the Irish Republic. Fairly stagnant, very rural. In fact, you can watch documentaries of English people in the 1960s going, you can come to Ireland and get a taste of the past. Look at this man on his horse and buggy, blah, 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 blah. This sort of idea. It stayed very rural, stayed very Catholic, and not an enormous amount, for better and for worse, not an enormous amount of development, but you have an enormous amount of immigration, people heading to America and Australia and England. Northern Ireland, however, you have a tiered system. So we have like our democracy is basically works off houses. So you got to vote if you own if you own two businesses, you got 2 votes for your business. So and because Protestants owned all the businesses, Protestants got much more votes. The system was gerrymandered so that Catholics areas didn't. For the vast majority of the Catholic politicians that were voted in got absolutely next to nothing put through, and we start to see this massive divide. So where the Troubles kicks off, so we come into the 1960s, the 1970s, where there's an enormous amount of investment. This idea if we're going to start building housing estates, building houses, putting money into these areas. So all conflict is essentially two ethnic groups competing over a limited amount of resources. So we have, and like no one was. So we talk about the poor Catholics, but the Protestants weren't any better off. So you have a limited amount of resource to go around, limited amount of houses, limited amount of jobs, and everyone's just competing for them. So this kicks off. It starts to create more tension, more violence. Before the Troubles, it was normal enough to have housing estates with Catholics and Protestants living in them. There's now areas of Belfast where still there's more what we refer to as peace walls, massive barriers up between Catholic and Protestant households.
They're more
keeping them divided.
I mean, they still exist. They don't. I mean, but am I correct in thinking that there isn't as much tension as there used to be? I know that we're not at the modern era yet. We're still in the 1970s.
We haven't come to the Troubles yet. So I mean, like the peace walls. So the Troubles kicks off. In fact, what would be the? So we still have
the kind of thing we're talking about. A lot of murals.
Murals. So this is the peace wall. If you click on one of those are the peace walls. But those haven't. The point I'm at yet. They haven't quite went up yet. So you still have in the 50s, 60s. You have Catholics and Protestants still like living in housing estates beside each other. And this comes. These are a lot of this stuff's very, very recent. Actually, since I think the majority of the peace walls went up since the 2000s in the last 20 years.
Oh, really? Okay, so yeah. I'm okay. So I was thinking about something else, but this is
no. You're right enough in a way. It's Belfast's very different than where I'm rural. You know, so it's lots of areas. In fact, it's sort of like these are like fairly impoverished areas. Nobody works. Nobody's worked in 3 or 4 generations. Nobody knows anybody who has a job. It's that sort of way.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that's what you do is you throw stones over the wall. But it's okay. So we get into the period of the Troubles.
Yeah,
what we refer to as the Troubles. Go ahead.
I pulled it down. I'm bringing up the Troubles. So the Troubles. What is the Troubles to you? And you're from Northern Ireland. The Troubles.
I'm from Northern Ireland.
In Northern Ireland.
Troubles is what happened in Northern Ireland. So,
and it's a political entity. A lot of people would also call it the North of Ireland.
Right? Catholics would refer to it as the North of Ireland rather than because the Northern Ireland is a state within the UK, and it's sort of like a rejection of that to say it's not the Northern Ireland, it is the North of Ireland.
Of the island and the Republic.
Yeah.
So
people who just sort of like it's almost like a little rejection of the creation of the existence of Northern Ireland, saying the North of Ireland. We have a period of which again, like violence is just fairly regular. Police violence is fairly regular. This stuff, these tensions just keep building back and forward. We then have
a discrepancy of police violence.
Police are 99% Protestant. So yeah,
it's funny because in the United States, it's like a stereotype that Irish become cops. Like
it's the paddy wagon.
I'm sure you've seen Boston Irish.
Oh yeah, I'm aware. I'm aware. Yeah. So nobody knows whether they're called paddy wagons because there was paddies in the front and paddies in the back.
Yeah, that's us, bro. That's my culture.
Yeah. So it's we have the RIC, which had been the Royal Irish Constabulary, became the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary.
Mm-hmm.
So internment was brought back in as a way to sort of like deal with these sort of like building tensions. And what internment is basically you just arrest a bunch of people, you hold them, and then you hold them indefinitely. So there's an internment. So like the internment comes in again. There's like 300 odd Catholic, 360 or something odd Catholics arrested and held without charge. 2 Protestants held without charge. So you can sort of see where the discrepancy was here.
Yes,
So
this is where the Fifth Amendment comes from in the US, done by the exact same people, by the way. They know what the Fifth Amendment is. You're not allowed. We literally have an amendment in the United States. I don't know if you're aware of it. That is because the British government did that to American revolutionaries. They
yeah,
made it part of our Constitution that you're not allowed to hold people without charge. It doesn't stop them from doing it today because
yeah,
they do it, but
yeah, get around it.
technically, you're not
You're not
supposed to
allowed
be allowed to.
to. So what happens is we have the Northern Ireland civil rights movement sort of begins out of this, and they begin to have marches marching against internment. They're all over the place. They're in Strabane, they're in Omagh, but there's one in Derry City starts. Now these marches had been made illegal, and for whatever reason, so the parachute brigade, the portion of the British military, is
Mhm.
there policing it.
Yeah.
And so interestingly, the British Army had actually been asked over by Robert Fitt, who was a national, not nationalist, but he was part of the Northern Ireland civil rights movement, because they thought, okay, we'll
Mhm.
bring over the British Army. They are indifferent to it, so it's like they can police this better than the police can. So
Yeah.
they come
I
over.
know what's coming. They don't know what's coming, but I know what's coming.
Yeah. So this is happened throughout. So so the day before. So okay. So what people essentially put it down to is the first wave of British soldiers come in. Um, they it's what was it again when they talked about in Iraq? You had the gain
In Iraq?
in Iraq, but America talked about like I can't remember the term that was used over and over again, but it's about gaining like trust and building like
Oh,
relationships there.
the hearts and minds.
Hearts and minds. So they had done that job. In fact, there's republic streets that are Catholic, and British soldiers were having cups of tea in Catholic areas, helping look after keeping the law. The second wave attentions had been growing, and now the second wave had come in, and the second wave hadn't got sort of climatized to what was going on. And we end up what happens on Bloody Sunday. So
Okay,
we
I'll
have
go back to that now.
so we have a peaceful march against internment. So world media is there, and for some reason, British soldiers, paratroopers, open fire onto an unarmed crowd. Now
Yeah.
they claimed that they were returning fire, and there was never any evidence of that. In fact,
And I think the media reported, the BBC,
British media did,
yeah,
but the world
they
media did
reported
not.
that they were in self-defense, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. But
So,
there were
let
people
me
who were
sorry, I'll
shot.
cut in.
Off the 26 who were shot, 13 were shot in the back while running away. One man had a bullet in his leg and then in his hand and into his face as he reached up to cover up his face. So no, these were executions. Now you can put it up to you had I like my issue like what happened that day. So like you could go like full blown and go, well, no, what happened was Britain went, these parties keep acting up, put them in the place, or this was soldiers in a tight situation, and I can't get my mind into the space of the soldier who just opens fire into the crowd.
I have a
Um,
hard time
yeah,
personally believing that parachute infantry broke discipline as opposed to a regular army unit. I mean,
yeah,
these
yeah.
are oh,
It's
oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute. For parachute infantry for us, these guys are this is these are special forces, not just
I'm not sure. The paratroopers are just the parachute. They're the boys who were trained to parachute into places. So I don't
okay.
know how, but again, they're higher up than regular army
Right. So
anyway.
I mean, I'm a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, by the way. A lot
All
of the
right.
listeners are veterans as well, but I want to make the distinction because there are some distinctions. Like a U.S. Marine is not like a special forces guy,
Mhm.
but a British Royal Marine is. So I don't know all the differences.
I wouldn't be up
Yeah.
on it
So these
either.
guys, Airborne Infantry Regiment of the British Army, but they're part of Special Forces Group, which is okay. So this is 2006 though. Okay, wait. The SAS? To provide support to the SAS. Okay, so yeah, these guys are elite. I mean, they should have enough discipline not to open fire on civilians.
So
You wouldn't
it's
expect it from them as opposed to regular army. They're more disciplined, more
yeah.
trained, is the point I'm trying to get at. But sorry, continue.
So basically, this is where the troubles start. So the IRA went from this very small, maybe dozens of active members, to thousands of active members
Right.
in a night.
And this is the provisional IRA. This is the second
this
one
is a
that we're
provisional. Okay, so basically we have the old IRA, which is the IRA of Michael Collins, was the IRA started in the Easter Rising. So the IRA was a combination of the Irish Republican Brotherhood and the Irish Civilian Army came together and they created a new entity, the Irish Republican Army. We have
and
then
they sought to create a single state for Irish nationalism. That's right.
That was their plan, and so they kept on existing. In the 1950s, they carried out what's called the Border Campaign. They were very Marxist, failed miserably. It's sort of like Irish republicanism. It's sort of become like almost embarrassing because of like people did not associate with the history of it, and so we have years of that. So people really not been attached to it. So we have then a breakaway in Sinn Féin. So we have a Sinn Féin is the old Sinn Féin. We then create the provisional. So the Sinn Féin that's now today is the breakaway group, is the provisional Sinn Féin.
Yeah.
And the provisional IRA are the breakaway from the old IRA. So this is young first, and then the old IRA ended up becoming like the Irish Workers' Party or something like that. There, it's become some irrelevant lefty party. So
that's us.
We end up. So the troubles kicks off. So over the next 30 years, 3,600 people are killed. It largely peaked. The most violence happened in the 70s, but then just
the one thing I want
to the 80s.
The one thing I want to get into is that like these three columns here, this and for those listening, there's the force. This is in Northern Ireland, so it's part of the United Kingdom. What you might colloquially call England or Britain or whatever. It's part of this political entity. But Northern Ireland is a part of that. It's one of the main four parts of it: England, Scotland, Wales. So there are the state security forces, and this is the Army and the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which is like their federal police force, similar to the Mounties in Canada. So then you have this, and then there's the second column, and that is these are Republican paramilitaries, and they're heavily associated with Catholics. And then you have a third column, and that third column, this is the Protestant paramilitaries. And the Protestant militaries, the UDA, the UVF, these are Protestant Catholic organizations. Protestant Irish. Like they are the people that are from Northern Ireland. A lot of them are ethnically background is Scottish. There are a lot of Scots-Irish in this that are Scottish people that moved into Ireland maybe 300 years ago. And those are the Protestant paramilitaries, and those are unionists. They want to remain in the union. The other paramilitaries, they are Republicans. They want to usually join the Irish Republic for all 32 counties, or are there some that wanted their own country? Was that a thing? Doesn't matter. Mostly
no,
that.
There wasn't. No, it was
Republican.
Yeah, Unionists wanted to remain part of the Union. Republicans wanted to join the Irish Republic.
The Unionists are Protestant, and the Republicans are Catholic, mostly.
Yeah. So what we wind up with is 30 years. So the IRA think they're going to have like a fairly heavy. You think they're going to do this in a couple of years? They're going to drive the British soldiers out, and then they're going to have just a civil war in Northern Ireland. That was sort of the thinking. That didn't happen. So Britain just, no, we're here for the long slog. So they decided to carry out a war of attrition and started going to England. So started bombing things, bombing English cities, and said, "Okay, um, this goes on for years. Not much changes. We have our first peace agreement, which is Sunningdale. It fails. A few years later, we end up with the Good Friday Agreement, which eventually set up the status quo that we currently have. So we have a power sharing government, first minister and a deputy first minister. So one has to be unionist, one has to be nationalist. Um, the Orangemen arrive universal to specific. Is Orangemen just a universal term or for a specific? Okay, so the Orangemen or the Loyal Orange Order. So they were sort of like the Masons. You know the Masons. You go to your Masons club. You drink with these people.
I
You
really
work
hope
with
you're
them.
watching this because they look like a bunch of nerds, man. I mean, this is what they look like.
Yeah, but this is because there are people sort of outside their time, because this was the norm. You put on a sash, you
Right.
played a lambeg drum, and you went for a march. This is what people did before Netflix.
Yeah.
Um, so the Orange Order was um just basically a Protestant working man's group, and Protestants looking after the interests of Protestants. So that's who they were. So uh, not all Protestants are Orange men, but all Orange men are Protestants. That's sort
Nice.
of why.
Let's keep using that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
sick.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, at this time there are, this is when like the term Irish car bomb comes from, because the IRA
Yeah.
is they are terrorist attacks, a
Mhm.
terrorist. But and I want to say, okay, so terrorism, right? So I've talked about this on the show before, but the idea of terrorism does have to do with an act of violence being committed, but the designation of violence that's committed as terrorism, it's not dependent on the violence itself, what type of violence. What the dependent factor is whether the organization that is committing that violence has the status and legitimacy of a state. So when the Northern Irish, who are trying to become part of a state, a Northern Irish IRA, the Irish Republican Army, in this case, the PIRA, which is the Provisional IRA, their status as a terrorist has to do with the fact that they're not legitimized as a normal organization. Whereas you take a group like the Taliban, right? So the Taliban they do commit terrorist attacks, right? But in 30 years, no one's even going to think about the idea that the Taliban is not the governing organization of Afghanistan and they're legitimate. So when the Taliban commits a crime, it's considered terrorism because they are a political organization that doesn't have that legitimacy. When the United States does something like, burns down a village in My Lai in Vietnam, or blows up a compound and burns a few dozen people alive in Waco, Texas, in its own place, or bombs a wedding in Yemen, several weddings in Yemen, or extrajudicially kills a 15-year-old American citizen in Yemen without trial, it's not considered terrorism, not because the United States is anything other than like not because of what that violence is. It's because of the legitimacy of the United States being as a state. Okay, so but yes, terrorist attacks in England by the IRA in order to create support for in order to advance this idea of Irish nationalism, right?
Yeah. So it largely, for the most part, doesn't work. Britain just it strengthens Britain's resolve. I mean, it's like whatever, when the Luftwaffe bombed Birmingham. It's to break their spirits. It didn't break their spirits. It just made people more resolved.
Right.
So it's just sort of like it just sort of made people angrier. In England, for the most part, just didn't care. Um, so we go through this 30 years. We get to the peace in the late 90s. We get to a Good Friday. So we have the SDLP, which is Socialist Democratic Labour Party, led by John Hume. And John Hume is sort of this in between. He's going to Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, Ian Paisley, and all of these, and Tony Blair and Bertie Ahern, and all these players. and he's trying to negotiate some sort of peace that everybody's going to be happy with. By that period, and earlier, the IRA's the army, the had basically come to the conclusion they weren't going to win this thing. They were just sort of like pissing in the wind at this point. But you had like a lot of like you had a lot of like hardliners who were ready to die, who weren't going to ever give up. So you have this, like, for Sinn Féin, you have like this sort of like, okay, we have to try to like work this somehow. They were, trying to like keep the hardliners in order, and but at the same time sort of like work towards something. Um, Good Friday, because the issue for the Unionists is they were always just giving up power, because Unionists had all the power, so any negotiation was them giving up power. So it was never ever good for them, and
Yeah.
everything was always benefit for the Nationalists. But then the big thing is, the demographic shifts were happening.
Right.
So
And they still
Protest,
are.
they
Catholics
still
are.
are. Yeah, so a Catholic family. I come from a family of six, and that was never that wasn't considered big at that, whatever generation ago.
Right. My
Um,
mother comes from 7, but she's an apostate, so it's just me here.
so she but then Protestants were having, 1.5 children or whatever. So so the demographic shift. So you had like the demographic shifts happening. You had the world economics, the economy was shifting and changing. Suddenly people were fit to go to work. Suddenly people were fit to get jobs. Seamus Mallon, my father, had been interested in getting involved in politics, and Seamus Mallon, who's a civil rights lawyer here, he says, "There's enough people doing politics. Go home and build a factory, and make jobs for Catholics." Um, yeah, so that's what he did. And it's just like, all right, so people can go get work. They can go after their home. You're no longer everybody's not fighting over this. The small pie. There's enough stuff to go around. The conflict had just sort of burnt itself out. We had
Huh.
an agreement that was it done enough. The problem with the Good Friday Agreement ultimately is, and again, it was not even the problem. It's why it worked. Is it wasn't a solution. It was just like, okay, this will do for now, and then we'll work
Right.
the rest of it out later on. And we've never worked the rest of it out. But
Yeah. So I wonder if this really has to do with economic factors, because what I think a lot of people don't realize in the United States, especially, but I think people in general, since people they tend to not really understand the changes in time themselves if they didn't live through it in the same way that they would. So like Ireland was still very much very, very poor, poorer than the rest of the developed world in the 60s and 70s. And it really isn't until Reaganomics in the 80s where Ireland, like, and then I mean this accelerates after the troubles, but really, like, there was a real Irish economic growth that kind of closed the gap with a lot of other Western European countries. And
yeah,
that
that was EU. That was Ireland joining the EU. Growing up, see me growing up, the Republic of Ireland was. It's not just the economy, because the Republic of Ireland
okay,
was noticeably poorer
got it,
than
got
Northern Ireland. So we would go caravanning to Sligo and Ross's Point, and you would know who was from the Republic and who was from the North by who had the nicer caravan.
right, right.
Caravans, I don't know if Americans know what a caravan is. Like
Well,
it's a
a
trailer,
camper, we would call it a
a
camper.
camper. Yeah.
Yeah, a camper trailer.
So
But it's in the US. Okay, so the difference is, though, in Europe, um caravanning is considered a low class activity, right? More so, and in the US it's not.
caravan. You go caravan holidays. No, it's just like it's a holiday. It's a nice holiday to go on.
I think I'm getting that from Top Gear. I'm
Oh
getting
no,
that
it's
from
not.
Gear.
All right, it's not even. No, it's not low class. They hate
I
being
thought
stuck
Jeremy
behind.
Clarkson specifically said
Yeah,
that. I shouldn't be listening to him.
he hates caravanning because you get stuck behind them on the road
Oh,
and
okay,
it's
just like
driving slow.
cyclists. All right.
Yeah, it's like cyclists, that sort of
Okay.
idea.
Oh,
Um,
I definitely thought that it was considered that because I heard Jeremy Clarkson say that 10 years ago, and he was just making fun of him, taking the piss or
yeah,
whatever.
no, I think maybe in England, maybe there's a different
Okay,
standard, but
got it.
yeah, no, I've been many a caravan holiday, but
I love him.
yeah, but so the Irish public was traditionally like per the Northern Ireland because you still had all this Britain money coming in. Um, so it's not all. I mean, like there was fellas. So the poverty, the economic end, like what causes conflict, isn't just economics. So there were lads coming in from housing estates and British soldiers coming from Birmingham. And Birmingham was it's a now, but it's a then. And they were
Yeah,
coming into Derry and coming into Belfast, and they were looking, at the Irish crying poverty, and they're like, "You're better off than me. I don't know. I don't see how you're poor." But it's not. It's not. It's not just it's two separate ethnic groups competing over limited resources. So
yeah,
the
it's a
Irish
relativity
Catholic,
thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's relative. It's so when you're living in Cork or Kerry and everyone around you is fairly poor, and the people who are doing well off you are still your own people. They're still going to mass with you. They're still in that same boat with you. When you're an Irish Catholic and there's a Protestant living, up the road doing much better than you, and he's no smarter than you, and he's no better than you, but he's just doing better because the system's rigged in his favor. Well, that
yeah.
causes resentment. That causes hatred. Um.
And relativity is very important. I talk about this
Oh
all the time, but relativity is way more important than absolute terms. It's the only thing that matters. I
oh,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
it's the
wholly
only
and
thing that
completely.
matters.
Yeah, it's sort of that's that bad thing with television where it's sort of like setting up. You could be like very happy in your hut in Africa, and then you watch an episode of Friends and look at how fucking look at the size of Monica and Chandler's apartment.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
how
seriously.
great is that? It's yeah, so it's again, so I put nearly all conflict, two ethnic groups competing over limited amounts of resources, and once the resources are like more evenly spread, then it decreases the likelihood of conflict.
Mhm.
Um, it doesn't explain everything, but if you look at any civil war, if you look, whatever, it explains most.
Right.
But
And there's a demoralizing element to that.
oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
there's an
totally.
extraordinarily and it's purposeful. I mean, that's what it was intended for. It's a playbook of settler colonialism. It's tied in. Also, we never got into this, but it tied into some of these other laws in the 1600s that continued that didn't really have to at a certain point
Mhm.
because they had been so successful. I mean, they not only stopped Catholics from owning land, but they stopped Catholics from speaking their own language, which is very important. We talk about that all the time.
Not
Going
here. So it's okay. There's a fantastic book of poetry called "A Farewell to English," right? And it's an Irish poet, and he's given up English and he's going to go live off and just speak Irish from now on. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's talking about the English language, and he said he referred to it as no better language to sell pigs in.
yeah,
So what basically it was why the Irish language died off was English is the language of commerce. If
right.
you want to, so there were you didn't need to put laws into place because
I
essentially
mean,
it's just like
they did put laws into place, but the economic incentive also
massively.
it's
It's
probably
like
larger. It really is a large. Yeah.
much larger because it just
But
makes it the
the
first like
thing that proves right, so the incentive, the economic incentive, absolutely,
mhm,
it goes over. But what there were English laws that were put into place that stopped people from speaking the language, and that was done purposely. And what that demonstrates, it wasn't the biggest factor. It definitely is the economic factor that in culture it was more profitable to speak English, so they did. But it does show that the English, and there's other instances of this in settler colonialism, were two things: that they were aware that banning the language and stopping its speaking, and this is something that's been done to indigenous people in the US, Mexico, Canada, Australia, that it is something that does it has a demoralizing effect on a people, and over time it will take away their language, which is a connection to their culture. It shows that they understood that and that they wanted that to be done to the people that they were taking the language away from. It shows that there was intent behind it. But yeah, sorry, Buck, keep going. I just for
mm,
the sake of the cultural anthropology show. I gotta
Yeah.
say that.
I don't know if there were ever any actual laws against Irish or speaking Irish. So I don't know if there actually were any.
We'll just
Um,
continue that, and
yeah,
I'll confirm that right now
look,
because I might be
confirm that.
missing.
Yeah, no, it just came no, because it just came down. If you wanted a job, you had to speak English, so you spoke English, and I feel like our preciousness around language is a luxury that other people just didn't have. People just were less precious around their own language. Language is fundamentally for them a method of moving information out of my head into your head. Um, but it's again, can't speak Irish, and it's my greatest regret. I need to sort that
Well,
out.
it's so right, and I mean, I would like to as well, at least a little bit. There's just a few phrases. It's normal in New England because we're mostly Irish descendants. Like people say sláinte, which is
Sláinte, yeah,
at least
cheers.
it's one thing.
Yeah,
It's one
sláinte.
word.
It's so funny because I only ever hear Irish Americans say sláinte.
Really.
So, yeah, it's like we don't say it here, but I'm
And that's
sure
the thing.
it's
It's so Irish American. So when I say like specifically, I'm Irish American.
yeah.
It's like there's a when populations are blank Americans, it's a selection of a population that's smaller, and it usually left at a certain time. So like my mom is 100% Irish, but
Mhm,
she's also fourth generation American on some of her sides. So like four
yeah,
generations of just Irish people in America banging each other is where I am from.
yeah,
I mean, I have one grandma that was Irish, but a lot of them weren't. Like a lot of them are way back. And the immigration mostly, almost 90% of it, the culture was established in different areas, especially Boston Irish, which is a thing.
mhm,
They were established by like the 1920s and then they evolve on their own. So there's like, not only is it a selected population in a certain place, but like coming from a different time. And then there's been 100 years of separate development. And of course, there are interactions between the North American diaspora and Ireland itself, but
mhm.
mostly separately. So they become their own thing. So I mean, that doesn't
But
surprise me at all.
the thing is, well, we have that constant drip because that Irish head in America never stopped. It was just
Right.
it's constant. So there's this constant connection. It
Yeah.
isn't like
So
if you have a group that's moved away and is broke off and they're separate for 400 years, and you can sort of see that evolve and change and it find its own things. But the fact that there was that constant connection and people
right,
moving
right,
back
right,
and
right.
forward and stuff, but mainly forward, moving
Yeah.
to
So
America.
it's a big factor. The underlying belief in like the creation of a separate identity, then with continued interaction, which does
Mhm,
influence it. It's the idea of this writer Colin Woodard who established and this is applying the idea of his theory. This is the American nations thing. Of there are different places in America that had an established culture that when it was established, it was a certain thing, and waves influenced it, but that there is something non-arbitrarily different about that underlying culture that was created. But yeah, 100% there's been interaction between them. But there's a certain percentage of things that are specific to Irish Americans
mhm.
and not to Irish and vice
Oh yeah,
versa.
certainly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, it's that. But it's still that connect. I know that connection's still there because you still go over to America, been to Boston any number of times. I have family friends who've
Yeah.
made their fortunes in America, live
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
there. The money coming back and forth, the money kept the
Right.
IRA going for years. Um,
We don't
it's
like to talk about that. People don't like to talk about that.
no, which yeah, there was something happened in the like 2001 that changed that.
Yeah.
Um, yes, before, but no, it was the but it's interesting. Like, so, but that sort of like brings us up into like modern Northern Ireland. So we have the peace process. Uh, the RUC, the police changed it to the Police Service of Northern Ireland. So we have it. They had goals of having like 50% Catholic, but for the most part, still predominantly Protestant. Catholics have not
Yeah.
really went into it. Um,
Oh.
we have the economy is still sort of pretend, but it's fairly stable. Um, There's still the sort of the poorer ends of Belfast. There'd be a lot of sectarian and people wouldn't interact with one another. Um,
So
but
so in Northern Ireland, right? So we're getting to after the Troubles. There
yeah,
are Catholic neighborhoods, specifically in Belfast, but elsewhere. Like in the city in Belfast, there are walls between and they are segregated neighborhoods of
yes,
Catholic and Protestants.
yes,
And there was violence between them in the past. Of course, remember there are not only paramilitaries, but also paramilitaries on both sides,
hmm
terrorist attacks on both sides, atrocities on both sides. Seriously, like it was not a fun time to be there. It's not good. It's not a good thing to exist under violence. Of course, there are justifications for it, and sometimes it happens. But
Again, if we see this like the justification, I there was a period when I was like when I was 16, 16, it sort of frustrates people. But I was like reading about whatever atrocity it was, and I was getting very cross about it. I said, if I'm genuinely interested in understanding this, I have to read Irish history as if I was reading about you know Caesar and the Gauls. I have to like be very separate from it and just sort of look at it not as this is my thing, but as an outside entity. And so I look at it and go, oh, this is how human beings interact under certain pressures.
yeah,
Um,
right.
so the constant sort of back and forth, and because this sort of like other atrocities and both. I'm just like, here's what happened. This is how it is, and this is why it happened. But understanding that is like I'm like incredibly
Yeah,
opposed to mass immigration. Incredibly opposed, and this through this, it's like, oh, I because it was two separate ethnic groups pushed up against each other, limited resources. So once the economy stops being good, and you've brought in all these other ethnic groups, what's going to happen there? I can't see that being good. So
yeah,
it's like you have to like it's understanding why, uh, uh, unemotionally understanding why these things happen, and then you can make
right.
good decisions in the future to try to prevent because it's horrifying. It's like some lad going out not coming home and a mother having to grieve over that. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
But
And
we
that's okay. So let me back up for a second. Let me establish like what we're talking about then, because right, the Troubles ending, the Good Friday Agreement's 1999, right?
yes.
So we're talking about like within most of the people listening to this podcast are in their late 20s, 30s, 40s. So
Mm-hmm.
like everyone,
Caught the
this
end
is
of it.
with, oh, I'm still going.
You're
Sorry.
grand, you're
So this is still going on right now. I mean, it's recent memory, and
grand.
like people don't want to live, and you shouldn't want to live in a state that is violence, that has violence around you in your everyday life. It's not a good thing. It's not something that people should strive for. But the point that you're making that I really like is that in certain conditions, when there are separations in people, when there is differences in people, and those differences can be Catholic and Protestant, they can be religious, the differences can be different ethnic groups. There are certain human conditions that when those human conditions occur, then violence is inevitable. And I agree with you with that. I agree that at a certain point, people will start committing violence just from a historical standpoint. That's a lot of what I like to do here. And I agree with you. So then what you're talking about also, and this is something that they don't report on the news in America. A lot of the people listening might know about this, but not everybody, is that there's a lot of immigration into Ireland right now, probably as a much higher percentage than into the United States. And they're importing people from different cultures
Mhm.
into Ireland. And eventually, yes, the economy will go down, and that could inevitably lead to violence.
Yes.
Right.
No, no. Could it would it will. This is inevitable. This isn't.
There already
This
is
isn't.
violence, right?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
just
So we have. So what's quite interesting is nationalism post World War II basically died off all across Europe, and this idea of having an identity and having a people and being connected to your group and having a sort of died off all across all the powers in Europe. In fact, it became very unfashionable. Whereas it managed to live on in Ireland because of the Troubles and because of our history. Um, and Irish nationalism is so intertwined with socialism and leftism, and then because that became sort of a value of the ruling class, Irish nationalism managed to survive. Um, so seeing yourself as so nationalism is alive and
Right.
well, and not to the point. So over the
I
last few
think there's
years,
also an element here of like the greater population being like victimhood is like trendy, right? And
yeah,
like
yeah,
and it's exported from American culture elsewhere. So I think in
yes,
the broader social sphere, it's like it's something that like in the global sphere, it's something that's like it's not bad to be proud to be Irish, like because it's a victim. It's a victim thing. And then it's also the other
yeah,
side of that is why did they have to have their nationality taken? And then also it's like, hey, why do the rest of us have to do it too, just because of
yeah,
some other stuff? But
yeah.
there's a story I want to tell you. And then sorry, I'll let you get right back into it.
No, go ahead.
Theo Vaughn, man. Theo Vaughn
Love him.
came. Yeah, I love Theo Vaughn too. And he so I saw him live with a few friends and we were at a theater outside of Boston. And he starts like asking people like what their I don't know how he got on it, but he's like he was making some joke about asking white people where they're really from, like
Yeah.
whatever. So like we an American person, he's like, "What's your ethnic background?" or whatever to this guy. He's like, "Oh, I'm Irish." And Theo Vaughn's immediate response was like, "Oh, you're one of the we didn't do it whites." Like, and yeah.
uh,
And then he asked three more people, and all of them were like Irish. And then he was like, "Where the hell am I, man?" Like, yeah. I guess he didn't know that um that it's all ethnically Irish around here. But
yeah.
yeah, speaking of that, before you go into the rest of that, this was the image I have up here I wanted to show because this is in South Boston. It's not in
Oh, is
this
it? I
isn't
thought it was. I just thought it was some football club somewhere. No,
no,
it's
this
Boston.
I mean, it looks like it's outside of some sort of stadium, but this is in South Boston, United States. It's a similar type of mural that you would see in Northern Ireland. These murals were put up on the walls
Mhm.
of different heroes, martyrs, Bobby Sands, who had the hunger strike. The Unionists have their own as well. They're both
Not
Catholic.
many. Not many.
Oh,
Uh,
okay,
of like they're sort of like the artistic, sort of like the unionist stuff is few and far, but they mainly just stick up union around the place.
got it.
They have
Yeah,
a few murals here and there for World War One, World War Two, but it's theirs is very particular.
got it. Yeah, so it's more of a Catholic thing then.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah. So in this right here, no raid. This is the Irish Irish American organization that sent the money over. One of the ones with the connections to the IRA, which is no longer fashionable
Mhm.
for obvious reasons. But yes, so we're talking Irish nationalism, mass immigration from different ethnic groups, and the underlying the underlying point. We just said that you had established that point, and I agree
So
with
that
you.
was okay. Well, so here, so this is we're into modern Irish history. So okay, so the Republic of Ireland traditionally very poor. Um, but Ireland then gets what's his name again? I'll come back to me. Joins the EEC, which will become the EU. An enormous amount of funding comes in. It starts to build up. You start to get better road, like the roads. To drive from where I am to Cork could have took you the guts of 2 days at one point. The roads were so bad you had to drive through every town. You'll do it in 5 hours and 6 hours now or whatever. Now, it's the enormous amount of build up. The change in Ireland over the last generation has been amazing, has been enormous. But we have been, but I suppose it's like it's mono ethnic nation, so just Irish Catholic predominantly.
Yeah, monoculture really is
Yeah.
broader. It's not only ethnically, but it's also religiously.
So
Yeah,
we have over the last few years, there's been a massive amount of immigration causing like last is causing all the issues that you expect, that sort of thing. I'm of the opinion that like you either have an empire or you're part of an empire. So you need to be because we're currently a part of like sort of like the gay American NATO empire at the moment. That's what we're
GAE, we're making that a thing, bro. We're making it
yeah.
happen. GAE, that is what we are living under.
Yeah, this is the
The
rule that
gay
we're under.
hegemony.
Yeah. So if there was something alternative to that, I would prefer to be under that empire. But again, you're always a part of something. Now, again, and nationality to me is blood, is dirt, it is blood, it is the soil outside this building. My grandfather ploughed. He pulled the rocks out from the ground. He built the walls with those rocks. I am connected to this dirt. That is my nationalism. That's what I'm talking about. Is this connection through blood to these people, to this culture. I do not speak the same language to them, but I have that blood. I am connected to the dirt beneath my feet, and that's my nationalism.
And
It's
for an American perspective, just so we're clear, anybody listening to this who might not be a super right winger, which is unlikely because that's most of what listens to this, but the if this was a Native American indigenous person that was saying this, then woke liberals would agree with you. They would fully
yeah,
agree. So I think that there's a tendency when any type of white person is saying something like that from certain elements of Western society
yeah.
is that this is a
I don't,
bad thing.
I don't care.
Right.
I don't care. I don't care about
Right.
some.
And
Yeah,
yeah.
I,
But it
I,
also doesn't even have to happen at the expense of anyone else, right?
no,
It's
no,
not
it's no, no.
that. Yeah.
This is the value system of everyone who's ever come before me.
Super right
Um,
wingers present. Yeah.
woo. No, it's
Yeah.
agree. People and places. Yeah, it's. I want a nation. Yeah, that's it. I'm a
Right.
nationalist for Nigerians in Nigeria. I'm a nationalist for
Right.
Mongolians in Mongolia, and I'm a nationalist for Irish people in Ireland. Yeah, it's a very like disconnected off this moment. Won't be trendy and say the people who are like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free in 6 weeks' time. They will not be fit to remember about Palestine. It's progressivism is just what's currently trendy at this
Yeah.
particular moment in time. But what was the comment there? It was just about
Oh, yeah. Reading the history of the British Isles 100% exposes the delusion of post-colonial Marxism. Irish, Anglos, Saxons, Cornish, Welsh, Danish Picts are all just white.
oh,
And yeah,
Indo-Europeans. We're Indo-European people.
right. We
Um,
are.
so it's
Um,
yeah. There's that connection. Obviously, we have our own separate, distinct things. We have our own cultural things. We should be connected to those things,
right.
because they're old and they ground us. Whereas everything that modernity offers us, everything that capitalism currently offers us is very cheap and throwaway, and it makes you feel good right now, and then feel absolutely empty moments afterwards. Yeah, no, it's be connected to what is old, be connected to what is real.
That's what we're here for. Cultural anthropology. It's what matters. It's yeah, giving you back your future through study of the past and other things. That's what I like to do. So there's I think over time with like changing technology, and when I say technology, I mean like all types of technology, not just physical, but also government technology in the sense of different ways of thinking, different ways of governing, but also technology and like how it changes the way that we interact, right? Because like
Mhm.
there was this concept during the famine, the genocide, when there was an American death or something. There's a phrase for Irish people who were coming to America or Canada, and they were essentially dying because they were never going to talk again because there was no way for them to talk, and there was talking in between them, but this was a term that I remember hearing. But with technology now, there's new interactions
Mhm.
across the world, and that creates a new environment, and that creates new ways of thinking about identity. Because when we have like you have like the idea of race shifts over time and place. So in Asia, if you tell a Japanese person that they're the same race as a Chinese person, they might get very,
Kill
very
you.
offended. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, they at a certain in the 1940s, it probably
Oh
would
yeah,
be an
yeah,
insult, right? But like in the US, we think of Asian as a race, not
yeah.
Chinese or Japanese. But 100 years ago, that wasn't really true. And so a lot of these
Well,
creations, these identities,
we can you can break down people. I mean, like if I took
You
Um,
can break down people in different ways, but which one is most important to them from a priority standpoint changes over time, and it can and will change again.
it's it doesn't change that much. Essentially, how in my head how this works, what matters to me is my family, extended family, community. I'm moving my hands out here. Like you can't really
Yeah.
say that, but and then nation. So it's like, oh, I'm connected to these people through. I'm more blood connected to someone in Galway than I am to someone in London. But then
Yeah.
I'm more connected to someone in London than I am to someone in France, than I am to someone in France than I am to someone in Nigeria.
Right.
Um, so it's like, oh, it sort of like extends out that way. Now it gets more
Yeah.
complicated than that, but on a ground level, I mean, on the simplest level, it's like, all right, I'm going to look out for these things that are closest to me before
Right.
I.
And that's like what I'm making a broader anthropological point
Mhm,
in that, like, over time, the the identity that people identify with, and what you identify with informs, like, the way that you view the world and how you view other people. It's very important. That really does shift over time. I mean, there were like slave plantation owners in the United States and the Caribbean who were of English descent, who were
mhm,
referring to themselves as Normans, not
mhm,
English people, but Normans in the 17th century. So this is the 1600s, and the Normans had invaded England in 1066. So it's been hundreds and hundreds of years, and these
mhm,
people still consider themselves linked to them in the past. That's the way they thought about themselves. And then you have the introduction of nation states, and you have like identities like nationalist movements, like the Irish, like all these different ones, and there are
mhm,
waves of them in how people think about themselves and what they think is most important, and those identities change over time. The
mhm,
idea that we are like whatever we are, like we think of ourselves as white in the US, and that is tied to certain genetic things that are innate as genetics, but the second we
mhm,
start identifying and calling those things something, then that's human culture, and then it's not in the realm of the innate, it's in the realm of the sociocultural, and how we think about it. And my point with that is the fact that it's a thing for cultural anthropology, but there was also something else. Oh yeah, thank you, someone just said something. There's pan Asia types. Okay, so this is something. There were a lot of these cultures around like the late 1800s, and the early 1900s. There were these pan continental movements. There was a pan American movement, like a pan
mhm.
Latin American movement, which sought to unite the entire area. A pan African movement, a pan
Yeah,
Asian movement. And at the time, they made sense. Now they seem ridiculous, but they seem ridiculous based on how
early they
technology
came
moved
out.
forward, how it happened. But they weren't ridiculous at the time. If they weren't ridiculous, people wouldn't have started those
Mhm.
organizations.
No, pan Arabism. I mean, like it made an enormous amount of sense. Whatever,
Well,
160 years ago, 100 years ago.
Pan
Yeah, I mean,
Arabism is a reality of history for most of Islamic
mhm.
history. The most of the time they were
Oh yeah,
organized
because
with
it was under
caliphs,
the
right?
Turks. It was all it was for the most time was
Right.
they were under the
And the
Ottomans.
Seljuks and the
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So that I mean makes like a lot of sense. The issue is without that dictator over the top of them, they're just a bunch of warring tribes, and there's no so
And that's why Islam started in the first place.
so Islam just connected them all up.
Mhm.
Um,
And that's why
but
identity is such a powerful force. These
oh
belief
yeah, yeah,
systems are how people survive.
yeah.
That's why a lot of countries were converted in the past.
It's but yeah. I mean, like it's sort of like the I think that sort of for the ruling class, the benefit of like individualism, the individual, of liberalism, because you are no longer a person in a group. You're no longer this solid thing together. You're an atom, and you're very weak and you're very small, but you can get porn on Netflix, and no one can judge you. So that's what they have to sell. But it's like it's yeah, that's what you'd much prefer. So that's largely what my assumption is what's happening now. So we have these small Irish villages at the moment that are being filled with refugees. Um, they're from countries that aren't at war. So I don't know what they're refugees from. They're constantly being referred to as Ukrainians, though they're from Africa, the Middle East. Um, Yeah,
Oh, is that
so it's so small Irish towns are just being filled up with people from the third world, and this is what's causing the riots now. So these
right?
places are now regularly being burnt down. So they'll announce that a hotel is going to house refugees, and it'll be 120, young men from the third world. Um,
It, I mean, no matter what your political affiliation is, it just doesn't make any sense. It's
no, no,
just
no. If you're a liberal, progressive, uh, wiping out the current culture, it does make sense. That's the value.
I
This is our
mean,
value system.
if you're one of those people and you think somehow that it's
This is
ridiculous
beneficial,
to think that this is wrong, like you need to just check yourself. Just take
no.
take a step
It,
back and think
it
about it. I
it's
think it's
no, but
crazy.
they're morally superior. No, no, that you're the bad racism, and they are actually really good because like love is love. Do you not know?
Right,
Do you not know?
right. We should
No.
all
So this is yeah. No,
sing
it's
"Kumbaya" in a drum
yeah.
circle. And
No, it's genuinely absolutely insane. Now I have my own schizo reasons that I think that's going on. I'll not get into, but it's
yeah, we talk
happening.
macro here. So if
Yeah,
you want to
yeah,
talk about global conspiracies and
yeah,
whatever, we don't go into
yeah.
like too much stuff. But
But
cultural
it's
factors are, you know, if there's an
this.
incentive for somebody in a like globalists are real. So like
Yeah.
if there's an incentive for something like the WEF, we don't go into the WEF a lot specifically, but as a organization, there are people who are globalists who no longer identify themselves. Their incentives are not aligned with any culture or nation. So it doesn't matter what happens to those people. They're just
My
consumers, like you alluded to
i-
earlier.
issue with like pushing on the WAF, I don't really think that. I think the WAF is like some fruity little club, and I don't think it has an enormous amount of power. I think
It's a stand-in for the concept of globalism, really.
yeah,
It's like there are people who think of themselves as globalists in the sense that they want consumers
uh,
and they don't care. They're like aristocracies in the past were aligned with their nations. That's why the English murdered the Celtic aristocracy because they wanted to replace it. Like
mhm,
it's aristocracies, their incentives were in line with the people. There were incentives that matched, and this was true in um the Greek parliament as well. The incentives was for the rich to like provide for people. Like you have increased amounts of military deaths in the past of the aristocracy because their incentives are in line with the country in the sense that fighting for the country gains them prestige as officers, not enlisted. For most of human history, enlisted are just slaves basically. Um, but yes, the incentives are in line, but right now they're not in line. And I think that that's what's key. That's what we should at least be saying. But continue with whatever you wanted to say.
yeah. Um. No, well, that's what's currently going on. So what I've been fairly impressed by is the Irish, especially people in the countryside. Uh. Uh. I got sorry, I have to provide a
No,
message
I
there.
distracted you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, 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 you're fine. No, no, I actually had the reply. I got a work message just come through there.
Oh, no
So
worries.
we have these we have these small Irish towns, and they're just filling them with people, Muslims and Africans and Chinese, and it's just like, why is this being done? Like, what's the end point, or what's the goal, or what's the purpose behind this? Now we're told it for some altruistic reason. We're not given. The government keeps saying, well, you don't get a choice in who lives in your community. And these people are saying, well, actually, we do. Um, but I can't for the life of me see anything other than find a reason why anyone would be. So for like the fella renting out the hotel, he makes a bit of money, and why the government would decide to pay to do this when it's not going to
I
stop.
mean,
It's just going to increase the amount of, because these people aren't refugees. They're just coming over from poor countries and just going, oh, we want the housing benefits. So we recently had a girl, Ashley
I'd do
Murphy.
it.
Yeah, of course you would. Of course you would. I don't blame any of these
You
people.
can't blame them. It's not
I
their
do.
fault.
I do not blame any of these people. If I
Right.
was in their position, I'd do the exact same thing. But
Yeah.
I blame the government.
I'll do it right now.
Yeah. So, Ashleen Murphy. So he was a Hungarian that was murdered. Now the media covered up how brutal the murder. She was stabbed, raped and stabbed. the media covered it up how brutal the murder was when he sort of came out of the court case.
So funny time to tell you, I am 3/4 Irish. I'm a quarter Hungarian. My one grandfather Hungarian.
So he was a Hungarian gypsy. So not ethnic Hungarian. He was a
Not
Roma.
Magyar. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So he
Still, I mean, it's still awful that somebody was murdered.
no. So he came over to the country. Was in the country for 10 years. Never worked. Was given a house, like a large house, for free. Then went out. I had been charged with like child rape in Hungary.
Oh.
Yeah, like the most insane case, and the government won't like say, okay, we should have some vetting process, and so we keep having like, so like that sort of kicked everything off, that the government won't like readjust policy. In fact, they keep putting these men from third world countries directly into these villages, and we keep getting everything that you would expect from that. So the murder rate doubled last year.
So over the past 2 years, immigration has surged to the third largest issue amongst Irish voters.
This is old. This is old. It's now the first biggest.
Oh, this is from December 14th. It's probably just from a different.
No. It's things have freaking heated up.
Okay, like right now, right? Because there has been stuff the last like 2 weeks.
We have it's now we have, because we've had, there's a small town in Tipperary where they were doing this in last week, and this week.
Are you in the Republic of Ireland right now, or are you in?
No, I'm in Northern Ireland right now.
Okay, got. But you're in the countryside of Northern Ireland.
Yes, yeah.
Right. Okay. Just for clarification, is this happening in both places?
No, it's happening just in the Republic.
Just in the Republic. Okay.
God bless Brexit.
Right. Oh. Wow.
So we're out of the EU. I don't even know. Like it's.
I thought it didn't stop it, but sorry. Continue. We're still talking about Irish. I keep derailing.
So we have this massive. So the government keep opening up centres to bring more foreign men to live in indefinitely. It doesn't. The entire policy does not make any sense whatsoever. So you have to. I have to actually just like look and go. You can't really explain it, but then I'm off the opinion as well that we're having like a dysgenics crisis. So quite a lot of people. But dysgenics is.
I'm not sure what that is. Yeah.
Okay, it's this idea that we have a Irish right of return.
There's more people of like. There's more Irish descent, like as a percentage. Like plenty of people are 50-50, whatever. But there's more of that in North America than there is in Ireland. Like 3 times as much.
The whole thing is there's more O'Neills and Murphys in America than there are in Ireland. But and the believes that and again I'd like to take some back dysphoria back. But it was like, oh sure, then the Irish go everywhere. It's like, well, the Irish went everywhere. Went to fucking Canada, America, and Australia. So come on.
Yeah.
They went to three places. Yeah. And so
we in New Zealand, maybe a couple in South Africa. That's about it. Yeah.
So we have to become a minority in our own home. We have to like double our murder rates. We have to not have access to doctors. We have to. You can't get a house. You can't see a doctor. Yeah. You can't. It's like the infrastructure can't take this. And then
one of my Irish friends just emigrated to Canada last year.
Yeah, the Irish people haven't really even to get
because of this. He emigrated to, and Canada's got a housing crisis too.
Yeah.
So
it's because if you were like say concerned about climate change, you go, okay, well, what we want to do is reduce the size of our economy. We want to reduce our population. We'll keep this going now. We'll close our borders, and we'll just sort of work with what we've got. And then your carbon footprint would decrease. Right. So these people claim to be concerned about that, but they want to increase the size of the populations. So take someone who has a very small carbon footprint in a third world country to bring them to a European country and give them a very large carbon footprint. So you don't actually care about climate change.
Over time, it'll lower everyone's carbon footprint because everything will just collapse.
Okay, well, yeah. Well, that is what they want. So I'm like, so no, I like a few before COVID. So after, you have to imagine, like I was fairly typical uh up until COVID. I was sort of like
Really?
having, oh yeah, very typical. And then I was just like trusted the systems. Knew they weren't perfect. Believe science is self-correct, and these institutions, they're ultimately working in the right direction. And then COVID happened, and I got like just watched a system lie non-stop in the most insane ways imaginable, non-stop to your face. And I was just like, where, you talk to, you hear about the COVID numbers are through the roof this week, and then you talk to a nurse, and it's no, there's nobody in the hospital. The COVID ward's empty. And it's just like, why am I not allowed to leave my house? It was
Yeah.
this sort of stuff that I'd already been sort of like the trans stuff had already been, because I lift weights and I'd been like in my skeptic circles, talking about it. I was at the time I was like lifting a deadlift of 260 kg, so whatever, like 520
It's a lot.
pounds, something like that. There, it's not. It's a decent lift for an amateur, but it's I
Pretty
was
damn good, dude. That's pretty good.
um, but I was sitting with some like fairly libby associates, and they were talking about how male and female strength differences are largely a social construct, and these are people in the sciences. I'm like, what? I was like, this. So I'd woke up at 11 o'clock in the morning, ate a sausage roll, drank a coffee, went into the gym, done my fucking big lift. Went, that's nice. Second strongest man in the gym now. I would be elite level woman. I'm an elite level female athlete if I decided my name is Mary. It's so this
Yep.
sort of idea that you have, and these are people who are doing government jobs. These are people who are working in the sciences. I'm like, what? So this started to like crack things, and then COVID, watching my most like educated friends become completely unhinged and have like totally break down, sort of like um what's this, under 15? Yeah, no, of course, yes. It's there's
This is
a
a
web
famous story.
yeah, no, there's a
Under
website you can go to, which is Boys versus Women, and they show female Olympians up against under 15, or call high school boys, uh who gets the most gold medals, and so it's like overwhelmingly the boys. um
It's funny you say that. That's awesome. My most popular thread on Twitter ever,
uh,
it got 160,000 impressions, is some anthropologists wrote they wrote an article about how
yeah,
the theory that men evolved to hunt and women evolved to gather is wrong. And like they cited the most ridiculous things in this, and they like, I mean,
oh
people
yeah,
really
yeah.
they really believe it.
Oh,
And
academia is,
women are not worse than men. Women are women. Men are men.
they're yeah, they're worse at some things, but
Sure, they're worse at some things, but as far as like value, I mean, like just
yeah,
because you
no,
can't
it's
lift as
no,
much doesn't mean you're less valuable. It's just
yeah, no,
different.
it's we. They done a video recently where it was asking fathers, they were out with their families, and they went, what's your daughter's birthday? Who's your daughter's best friend? And like the father said, no idea about any of these things, and the women,
Who
of course, knew
cares?
all of it. Yeah, and it's like they're like, oh, how bad are men? It's like, no, men and women complement each other. They're providers. They're out with their family. They're looking after. They're doing these things. They don't remember the dates. I don't remember my own birthday most of the time. It's like it's trying to like, how bad are you because you can't do this? No, it's men and women complement each other. Um, and it's a sort of like denial of that. But no, we had that. No, so COVID basically destroyed my trust in the institutions. Because I think like the actual sciences have to be done by a certain type of autist. Because like caring about truth is completely weird and autistic. To care about how the world actually operates and why it
Mhm.
operates the way it does. Like, why do you care about that? Is that useful? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, what you care about is um things that increase your position in the social, in whatever, in the social hierarchy. That would be a normal thing to care about. Caring about how everyone around you thinks about you. Whereas the autist doesn't really care. The autist picks their weird little thing. They get really into tanks, and they decide, I want to know everything there is to know about the turret speed of the Panzer IV. That's a weird autistic desire. Those people have been pushed out of the sciences. They've been pushed out of the institutions, and have been replaced with women who don't really care, for the most part, about these sorts of things. They care about community, and they care about everybody having a nice time, and it's fair and it's equal. And it's like, no, science isn't fair and equal. It's like, can you get closer to the truth? Can you make this thing work a little bit better? Can you do this a little bit better? But those people have been pushed out because, again, at the end of the day as well, if you are picking the people to work with, well, again, we have now equality laws and stuff like that already. But before that, you have just sort of like a selection. We put a pile of women into the schools, and it's like, who are you going to pick? You're going to pick the weird autist who can't look at you right. He's very good, but you can't talk to him, and he's very difficult to be around. Or are you going to pick the nice girl who has tidy handwriting and done all her homework and is super polite and always says sorry? Like, who are you going to pick? And it's like, yeah, obviously you're going to pick the girl. So, but greatness and this actual, like that, Isaac Newton, one of the greatest minds that has ever existed, and there'll never be another one of them again. Complete asshole, would never want him around you, completely weird. But these are the people who sort of drive things forward, and so you're not going to get that. And then the institutions now don't really care about, because it's filled with these sorts of women, weak men who are very passive and agreeable and just want to get on. Because again, the solid men are sort of like the sort of more high testosterone men who sort of like care about that are gone. They've been Me Too'd and pushed out to the side. So you're just sort of left with this very compliant, complicit. This is what the institutions are now filled with. They're no longer fit for purpose. Universities, right. Like you're talking about airlines, talking about having diversity hires. And it's like,
I mean, you saw the plane recently.
Mm-hmm. The
whole door came off.
So we're heading towards a competency crisis. So we're just not.
Really are.
So the world's getting more and more complicated and more difficult, and we have less and less competent people. And the competent people quite often aren't nice and agreeable. Because you take a Steve Jobs, for example, complete asshole.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, it's like a Bill Gates. Bill Gates like gives off this sort of nice guy. Anybody who's dealt with Bill Gates is like, no, this is a very vicious. Like if you're not, everybody who works with Bill Gates likes Bill Gates, because if you're not at his level or at the level he wants you around, you're gone. He's not having anybody who's in any way slightly not at the level of competence he expects has them right. You're not even going to associate with you.
Good for him, honestly.
Yeah, no, but it's not even. Yeah, it's just like, yeah, but these are the people who sort of push on things, create big things, make systems work. But the system actively doesn't want those people, and so you're now. It's just here we're just in the period. We're in the collapse. That's just the reality. Get your gun, get your chickens, get your Bible, and just we wait it out. It's just hopefully it's a slope, but it's the system as we know where we are and the comfort that we have become used to, that's over. But that comfort has been the thing that's made us soft, that has made us
and that's that same relativity thing, I think, because like people, I think that like, I study a lot of history. I study a lot of history. I study a lot of human cultures. A lot of people that live on this earth right now think very, very differently from the people that live in like the Anglo-sphere, we'll call it, or the first world or whatever. And like, people have a relative sense of how things should be, but I always like, this is all an aberration. Like I forgot to do this.
Fucking weird.
It's an aberration. This is not normal. I try to post once a month. I think I've forgotten to do this, but like walking through the airport, take a picture of the airport. Like, this is an aberration. This is not normal. This in most of human history, what we have right now is it's not It's not it. It's not
the
the majority of people's experience. And
the poorest people, the poorest person you know, has a better quality of life than European royalty of the 1900s.
yeah, in absolute terms, that's definitely true.
They
Yeah.
can travel more, have access to better healthcare, have more access to better quality food, have more entertainment. They have warmer showers, softer beds. The quality of their life. If they have an infection, they go get an antibiotic. They have a toothache, they can get a filling. The quality of
Yeah.
life that we have is, uh, and it's
And
this
we
sort of
just
problem.
keep getting more depressed. It
Oh
doesn't matter.
yeah.
It never mattered.
No,
It
it doesn't.
never
It doesn't,
mattered.
because
Not at all.
we are an animal that is dependent. We are an animal that is not comfortable with comfort.
Right.
We need to, before you can appreciate being warm, you must be cold.
Mhm.
So, and it's because we're so protected from the cold, because we don't experience that the way that we have traditionally experienced it. Well, then you can't appreciate it. It is just how it is.
Mhm.
And so you cannot appreciate the good without getting the bad.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm a big fan of stoicism. So I would like partake in um, intentional discomfort. So
Right.
sleeping on the floor. My friend, I be in Tipperary a lot, and I sleep in. I don't get a hotel. I have an office in a warehouse unit with no heating or anything, and I sleep in it. And somebody just messaged me there now, saying it's -5 in Tipperary. Was it are you in the unit tonight? So I'll like purposely put myself into positions of discomfort, because then you appreciate comfort when you have it, but you don't
Yeah.
appreciate the hot shower if you never had the cold shower. It's that sort of way, but because we, and again,
It's relativity. It really
yeah,
is. That is everything. Absolute terms don't really matter all that much at all.
no, no, not at all. But
It's That's funny. It must be hard to feel like an elite when the plebs are so comfy.
yeah,
I think it's a good point because it's relativity, right? You want more than other people, so
hmm.
it's gotta go higher and higher and whatever.
There's a great line from There Will Be Blood, where Daniel Plainfield goes, "It's not enough for me to succeed; others must fail." You know, and that is I have talked to people who have that mindset.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, it's like if I'm doing well and everything's going okay, I'm happy. I don't really care what's going on around me. But other people, they genuinely hate people around them. They hate them, and so like what's going on now, you have that has to be understood. The people who are doing the things that they're doing now to Europe, so this mass immigration and stuff like that, they hate us. Like that's something that has to be understood. They want you to suffer. They want you to collapse. But this is good. I ultimately think is that this comfort and coziness that we have now is ultimately bad for our souls, and the system has to, because again, you'll never do great things. I mean, you need to suffer. You need to be pushed. If we're going to go out to the stars, we need to hurt. We're
It's
not going to
always
go
the
out.
bastard son of the king, right? It's never the firstborn prissy boy. It's always the bastard son of the king that has something to prove, but has something to build off of.
It's my what's it again? My father my father rode a camel. So that I could ride a Porsche, so I could drive in a Porsche. My sons will drive in Ferraris, and their sons will ride camels. It's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
uh, it's that there. It's yes, civilization is cyclical. That whole idea of good men make strong times. It's
Mhm.
hard, hard times make strong men make good times make weak men make bad times make strong men. Um, so I'm surely I think we're the weak men of good times. We do not fully appreciate just how soft and how easy and how nice everything is. So it's we need those, but again, we need those bad times to sort of to come back. If we're going to survive, we need them. It's a portion of us.
but is there anything else that you want to say
I
about
suppose we
like,
talk about just sort of
yeah,
like the rise of nationalism in Europe again. I suppose because that's what we're sort of this is I think maybe what we're talking about. Where
well,
nationalism has sort of come very easy to Irish because it was never we were never
right,
demonized for it.
right. So the nationalism is yes, exactly. We're living in the or there were because they're victims, whatever, or Irish people are victims, and
Yeah.
in the concept of the modern thing, they're not demonized for it. But it does seem like it is a Ireland is a specific case to look at, but it does
Hmm.
have implications, and we haven't went there yet. But that if we've talked about the history, the present day, and now the future, I mean, I think both of us have a shared understanding with how this type of stuff ends. I know for me, I don't want to speak for you, but I personally, I really don't, I legitimately don't like violence. I'm
Hmm.
active in
No,
the
nobody likes
anti-war.
violence.
Right, right. I mean, I'm active in the anti-war movement in the U.S., like
Uh-huh.
legitimately active in it. And I don't want violence, but I do see it. And you agreed with me earlier, is that like sometimes situations. I'm not saying I'm not personally saying it justifies it, but I'm saying that situations when they get to a certain point,
Hmm.
it enough people, it's going to justify violence for a certain element of the population if you look at it from a macro lens. So it's inevitable. It's
Here's the thing,
inevitable that that comes.
which
And
you're
we want to
doing.
stop that situation from happening. We
Yeah,
don't
but
want that situation.
and what I want you to stop doing as well, and people to stop doing, people on the right, is stop justifying yourself to shit libs. Because I'm not saying this, and I'm not saying that, and I'm going to be very clear
Yeah,
here. And
yeah, yeah.
don't them bastards.
To be honest with you, I am speaking to my own audience in a lot of
Yeah,
ways. I don't want them to misunderstand me at all. I don't
my
think shit libs listen to my
yeah,
podcast.
but I think it's like the right one because I was again. So I'm like coming from it as a like show me who's traditionally like I'm genetic, so I'm a big genetics person. I'm a genetic lib, right? I am untidy. I am open to new experiences. I am uh, all of these in the big five personality. But I'm also like kind of odd. But I'm like, but I care a lot about the truth, and I want to get about there and sort of like an understand. So I've come to conservatism and come back to Catholicism through reason. Realize, oh, this is if you don't have these things, bad things happen.
Mhm.
It's like and it's like so I've come back to these true reason true. So I think the person who's like genetically conservative, um, they just are. Whereas I've got their true argument, true reason. They don't really understand, and because we're living in gay American empire. Uh,
I love that that's really becoming a thing.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like that it's our culture is for people who should read learn Greek and read the Iliad. Now we have our connection as friends. So this is the thing that bonds us all together. We've all seen every episode of Friends. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I've never sat down to watch an episode of Friends, but just through osmosis, I have seen every episode of Friends.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so we have so I don't mix. So this is the thing is again because of that whole autism thing. It's like I don't really care what anyone around me thinks. And it's like if someone's like genuinely offended by what I've said, I'm like, yeah, that's happened, which is detrimental to me because it makes me like a weird outsider, and you don't get invited to things.
Right,
So,
yeah, yeah. Amen.
but it's
Alright,
like,
thanks, Carl.
oh yeah, but then I'm the person who's going to like, oh, here's how the world actually works because it's like I don't care, and I'll sit and examine and read, and oh yeah, and I don't care if it's like there's a whole pile of my opinions that would get my bank account shut. Basically, is that sort of way. Um, so you just sort of like wind up. You inevitably, if you just keep picking at these things, you eventually wind up at this at the positions that you hold. But conservatives, because we're in our again gay American empire, we are super apologetic, but people are super apologetic and they're constantly trying to explain themselves and just make sure and just
Yeah,
make
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And it's I don't care anymore. I
Yeah,
do not care, and I'm not.
yeah.
If I offend the most, if, I do not care. And it's
Yeah,
like,
I get it, and I think it is important to not use the phrasing or the framing of like, your opponents and people that don't like
yeah,
you.
this is that we keep
Yeah,
using, and I've
yeah,
never, because I've come straight from into this, so I do not use their framing. I do not like when they go, they use the buzzwords on me. I go, okay, I don't care. And next, and and is that it? Okay, go on. And so like it's do not ever be apologetic. They smell, people smell weakness, and they smell, and if you, once you try to deal with nuance or yeah, right. So when I'm having a position argument with some sort of discussion or whatever with someone who's a position I agree with, or when I'm like in private with them, we'll deal in nuance. Maybe we'll talk about these things, and the macro sense. Maybe we'll have those conversations, but in general, I just say, and again, I don't argue anymore. I tell. I exclusively tell. I'll never get into debate anymore. I will tell you. This is what your opinion is, right? Because if I was interested in changing the opinion, I wouldn't argue with them. I would change their TikTok feed. I would change what they seen on Instagram, because it's
yeah,
like, yeah, it's not as if anyone has come to the conclusion about the trans stuff because they've thought long and hard about it. No,
right.
no, there was an episode of whatever goofy soap opera Disney Channel you watched, and then that changed your mind. That's how, but again, that's simply values are top down essentially, and the ruling
Hierarchical
class,
fusion is what that
yeah,
would
yeah,
be called in anthropology, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
So the ruling class have decided this is what you believe, and this is what you believe, and you believe it so passionately with all your heart. Don't know what the I had a friend, and we were talking about whatever it was, like Kyle Rittenhouse, what a murderer Kyle. And again, I was like, and it was the George Floyd and Kyle Rittenhouse came up, and I said, first and foremost, right, we are on a mountain on the side of Ireland. Why do you care about George Floyd? Like, why do you care about that? I says, you care about it because you've seen a good TikTok dance. That's why there's a TikTok dance, and you were told to care about it, and now you care about it. So there's nothing more than that there. And then I sort of like spurred out and just went, with the Kelly Rittenhouse stuff, went detail by detail, every name, every person, every shot. I went, okay, now explain to me what was wrong there. Of course, didn't know anything about it, knew the TikTok dance version of it. And
and
this
then
is,
you're in the wrong, right? You're in the
no,
wrong
oh
in that
no, the amount of people I have noticed, right? People want strength. This is why is my see this is my issue with the whole, like, I'm just understand and maybe make this clear. People don't respect that. People respect strength, and the
Yeah,
average person, people do not come to the conclusion they come to because they've thought long and hard about it. Maybe they think they thought that, but no, they didn't. They seen the TikTok and seen Instagram. They seen the advertisement. They were sold that idea by the people in charge, right? That's how they came, right? So what they want is a strong voice saying, "This is how the world actually is." Obviously, they want to be told. That is that. That's it. Never argue. Tell.
I think you're right, dude. I think you're right,
Yeah. And that is,
and you
that
know
is
you're
my, yeah. I know, right? Because I've
yeah.
seen this. I had this. My friend, we were in America there not too recently. I was over for a bachelor party, and my friend and I've typical American sort of like having their like opinions about whatever. And there's one guy talking about. My friend who was the English lad was with me, and he was just blown away by it. How, because everybody's just live around me, 'cause it was in New Orleans, and I was just like being unapologetically right wing with everybody. And I was just telling everybody, and everybody just fell into line, and everybody was okay. And like the shit that I was saying to them, there was one guy who was talking about how if his grandfather was at January 6th, he would have told the FBI. I went, you're pathetic. You are pathetic.
Oh,
You are
truly.
a rat. Nothing
Yeah.
more pathetic. You don't know what my grandpa did. You know my relation. He says, my grandpa beat me. And I went, he didn't beat you enough. And I insulted him. I called him a rat. I made fun of him. And then by the end of the conversation, he just wanted to be my friend. He wanted my approval. And it's just, but that's human nature. It's just like, oh, people feel strength. And it's physical fitness matter. This is the thing, right? Physical fitness matters. How you talk, your demeanor, that you're confident in how what you say. Always be confident. Do not ask, you tell. Always, always. When I'm dealing with, right? tell. I'm uninterested in whatever silly argument you have. I'm uninterested in whatever TikTok video you see. Did you see a good TikTok video? Yeah, destroy and tell. That is how this operates. Now, I think we're heading for collapse. There's no getting out of this. IQ's declining. The system has made us, vast majority, far too soft to survive anything. The people who are in charge of the system hate us. We are the carbon they want to replace. There's no the idea like, oh, we're trying to address climate change. See, if you want to address climate change, you'd be building nuclear power plants for the last 60 years. They haven't been doing that. Why are they not doing? Oh, remember the wind turbine. So everyone knows this is all horse. So nobody actually wants to address. So these people, every policy they're pushing is simply to rid themselves of the people who stand in the way of their power and to replace them with people who are going to be more easily controlled. And that's it. That's just, well, of course, that's what you want. That's what happened in the Ulster plantation. There were Irish people who were not easily controlled, so they sent a bunch of Scottish Protestants who would take orders. And so it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's why a ruling class would do that. Obviously, obviously that's what you want. And so the issue is, okay, right? So you have a ruling class who so you have two things. So they want to create this like technological future techno-authoritarian society, but you need people to like the ruling class aren't as smart as they think they are. They're not nearly as intelligent as they think they are, and it is to a point where it's insane. Because they think everybody's sort of interchangeable when everybody's not. Not everybody's good at not everybody's going to be fit to run a power plant. Not everybody's going to be fit to make sure the water's clean. Not everybody's going to be fit to make sure the roads remain without potholes. There's certain people, certain groups, certain people can run civilization. And less of those people are, then civilization stops working. So their techno future doesn't work because you do not have enough competent people to operate within that system. So the system just collapses in itself. But I think we inevitably we're heading head first towards collapse. I don't know. You look at whatever Venezuela or South Africa, Detroit. You look at any of these things and you go, those places have collapsed. Now they're still semi-operating, but by any means, like that, if your town turned into any of those places, you would say that my town has collapsed, and that's where we are all heading in that direction. But again, I think it's just civilization is cyclical. We just accept that, and we prepare ourselves. We prepare the people around us. We look after. This is why I'm so happy about seeing the Irish communities come together the way they have, because I can't affect what's happening in Brussels. I can have no effect on what's happening in Johannesburg. I have no effect on what's happening in London, but I can affect my neighbours. I can affect my family a little bit, maybe, hopefully. So you do these things. You work on yourself, you train, and then you work on your tribe and train. These are the things you concentrate on. This is how you don't get blackpilled. But collapse is inevitable, and maybe that's it. And I think in part, that's probably a good thing, because something better has to rise up out of it. You have to. It's that's just the way, because we're too soft and docile, and we're not going to do it. America's talking about going back to the moon. It's like, no, you're not. That's not happening.
It's not
they literally have just basically said this. It's like, oh yeah, it's much more difficult now. It's like, yeah, and it was just like America peaked 1969. It peaked when, and then it was stagnation and decline, and we don't realize. So nobody knew they were in the friggin' end of an empire, and people still don't know. But it's like, yeah. But here, maybe my one like sort of like was what's the South American country that has that arrested all the criminals, brought the crime rate down to
El Salvador.
El Salvador. That, so potentially we get our Caesar. Potentially a Caesar comes up and he turns things around. Now, whether that happened or not, I don't know. But for the most part, you look after yourself, people around you, and you focus in on that there, and that's the white pill. I think that's. I know again, yeah, but I keep moving away from. I don't even know how I got there, but
No,
yeah.
it's good. It was a bunch of good stuff. I'm gonna clip some of it, definitely. So yeah, I think we can stop there. Thanks for coming, Buck, so much. Unless you had anything else you wanted to close it
No,
off with.
I suppose I suppose the thing we were talking about was just nationalism. I'll just say the rise of like nationalism in Europe again is happening. So after
Yeah.
World War II, nationalism has basically become a dirty word. But again, Europe was like suffering from like post-traumatic stress after two of the most violent wars in human history,
Right.
and nationalism, which was to blame for these, in part to blame. You know, and again, it's resources. Hitler wasn't invading uh, Poland for the banter. He was invading Poland because he wanted to grow wheat and feed
Right.
Germans.
Yeah.
You know, lack of resources. You know, it's different ethnic groups competing over a limited amount of resources. That is war. But died off, became completely untrendy, largely down to television, largely down to schools, largely down to uh, heavy amounts of propaganda. Didn't happen in Ireland. We were allowed to be nationalists because we have again that because we were one of the victims. And again,
Yeah.
which is beyond pathetic. It disgusts me.
Yeah.
It genuinely disgusts me. I think it's the desperate. It's the Native American that they were. What they were
Noble
warring
savage.
noble savage
Noble
tribes. They
savage.
brutalized their enemy and they lost the war. And then somebody better came in and wiped them out. That's what happened. That's what happened. There's a nobleness in that, and there's a strength in that, and that's what happened. But the liberals turned them. Oh, they played the peace drum and smoked the peace pipe. Oh, they were so peaceful and nice, and they were all transgender as well. You know, it's like they've turned them into this like grotesque parody, this silly little thing for their silly little stories, and it's like they want to turn everything pathetic and weak like they are, because weakness is, I don't know, it wants to spread. If you're weak, you want everything around you to be weak, and so they constantly try and turn that there. Back to nationalism in Europe, it's now turning. Germany's now switching right wing. I'm having conversations. I keep that's the one spot to watch. So the Germans, the amount of Germans who I've spoken to, you're like, oh yeah, we really can't talk about this, and we really. But then I be very direct with my position, and the amount of Germans will go, yeah, they'll have opinions that you wouldn't expect them to have, perhaps, and they'll start, complimenting people that you maybe wouldn't expect them to compliment. But it's over and over again. It's like, oh, it's lying there, it's dormant, but it's been suppressed
Right.
by this system. Twitter has been fantastic. Twitter has been amazing. What Elon Musk just opened it up, and it's just like, oh, we're allowed to have these opinions again, and it's how the lib is just sort of like folded in themselves, how they just sort of have to mute and block everybody because they can't defend it, because they didn't have to defend the position. They just got the person removed off the. Yeah, I do not like. I have to do obviously have to be selective about certain things I say and what we're doing, and I have friends on it, so I don't be. And again, as I was saying, I have a lot of friends still, so I don't want to go total uh, schizo right on them. But I occasionally leak it out every so often. But yeah, but no, it's the switch in Europe, and I think what's happening in Europe is necessary, because if you don't have something to push up against, you eventually become weak and docile and nothing. So having what's happening now is going to make everything sharper. It's going to make everyone a bit stronger, a bit angrier. It's going to build something out of that. Uh, the reason America didn't go to the moon because just look how pretty it was. They went to the moon because I want to show you my dick's bigger than your dick. This is why America went to the moon. It was men who wanted to go to war, couldn't go to war, but we're going to stick a rocket into space. It's that aggression, that anger. That's what created that.
The Indian Wars ended in 1924. Like the West wasn't really like the frontier wasn't closed until like the late 1800s, early
Mhm.
1900s, they were still fighting with Native Americans. Like there were
Yeah.
people alive in 1969 who could have seen like unsurrendered, not on reservation yet Native Americans living, still trying to like have that life in the face of, you know, Western expansion. There's something to that. There's something
No, I
to
know
that.
they fought. No, that's beautiful. It's one of my favorites. I think it was Benjamin Franklin talked about like people going native, where he talked about so like they had this problem of like of Europeans joining the Native American tribes.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Um, yeah, going native, going with them, right? And he says he was never aware of any Native American who wanted to join civilization. Just he's never
Dude,
aware of one case.
that is a very, very niche quote. I don't know if I've ever met any American that knows it. I know it because I study Native American stuff a lot,
Yeah.
but that's incredible.
No, it's uh
So,
it's I'm always sort of like on the verge of like Ted Kaczynski and just getting a shack and living up in the woods by myself.
yeah.
Um so I'm like yeah, no, so this idea of like going native is like, oh yeah, that's what you'd want to do. Obviously that's what you want to do. I don't understand why anybody would want anything else.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
no,
and there
it's
wasn't any the other direction, by the way.
yeah.
It didn't happen. There's no one running away
Maybe
from the Native Americans and walking up to some freaking
oh
colonial house.
yeah, so I can, work more hours, eat worse food. Yeah, I know it's like I have.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh yeah, no, we've yeah, no, it's so yeah, no, that's my
All right, man.
position. But
So
no, yeah, no,
is
I think
there
I keep going off on different. This
No,
is
no,
the
you're
spirit
good.
in
You're
me.
good. You're good. It's good stuff. They're gonna love it. I'm gonna in a little bit, I'm gonna pull it off the live and then I'm gonna edit. I'm gonna post it on the Patreon immediately that I'm gonna be using. Patreon, it's down there, and then I'll edit it down and I'll put it back up here probably in like a week or so. I'm relaunching everything now. I haven't put an episode up on the feed for like a month. So
Mhm.
this will be the first one probably. I have one with David Gornowski. So do you want to promote anything? I know you said you don't do a podcast anymore, but I can also I can promote your Twitter off of this as well if you wanted some followers.
If
I'm sure you
if
get
you want,
some.
I don't really want any followers or anything anymore. I don't
Okay.
really care. I just I don't even like what the Buck Mulligan. So my real name's Paul. So Buck Mulligan's a character from James Joyce's Ulysses, but I used to use it for when I was doing all my science and skepticism podcasts and stuff like that. There, so that's where I had like, but then I don't even like associate in that world anymore.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So yeah, no, I think there'll be a lot of people if they heard me now. You know?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just great show. JC is always saying hi and bye to everybody, so that's a normal thing. And
Thank
goodbye. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Thanks so much for your time, Buck. I appreciate it. We'll
No, no,
do it
no,
again.
it's
We got
fantastic. Oh
something
no,
to talk
definitely, definitely. And when you're over here, give me a shout.
about. Yeah, I
Um,
will. I will.
I be around the country. I be in Dublin twice a week, and I be in Tipperary once a week. And
Okay.
yeah, I'm everywhere. But yeah,
Cool.
no, I'll take you on a tour.
All
But
right, man. Absolutely.
here,
Okay.
no,
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
good luck. Bye.